Breaking news out of Nairobi, Kenya, where ongoing protests have now inflamed further.
Never before protests like those in June and July.
Washuka, we're back.
We are back, Shiro. What has it been? Almost a year?
Imagine, it's been a year and quite a number of things have happened since season 2. In 2024, Kenya saw a series of protests triggered by the introduction of a finance bill spearheaded by young people. And then that morphed into regular protests that were holding the government to account. It's really been amazing to see people taking to the streets and demanding accountability from the government. It felt like a season of protest. But, as often happens here, some of the protests have been met with some pretty scary backlash and lots of force. Seeing the response from the security forces has been heartbreaking and worrying. I mean, young Kenyans are being murdered. They've been abducted and tortured.
Last year, we had a team of phenomenal interns working out of Macmillan Memorial Library, right in the heart of the CBD. This was the epicenter of protests and the backlash. So when things got hectic, the interns moved to work out of Eastlands Library in Makadara, which is a completely different part of the city.
Yeah. These protests have had an impact on all of our lives, but particularly our interns, who are part of the generation at the center of all of this, Gen Z. So, we began to chat about their experiences and thoughts around protest and resistance as young people in Kenya. And that's what led us to the idea behind this season of stories. We are going to be doing something a little different. The stories in this season are researched, reported, and recorded by our team of young Kenyans, all centered on the theme of protest. And this is important as we mark a year since the Reject Finance Bill protest movement, and we hope you'll tune in to season 3.
This is a palace for the people. I am Angela Washuka.
And I am Wanjiro Koinange. Today's episode is on student protests. When people think of student protesters, they often think of university students, as in adults. But in Kenya, some of us start protesting much earlier, like in high school. But high school student protests aren't often taken very seriously.
Right. Maybe in our cultures, maybe everywhere, the grievances of children aren't taken as seriously as those of grown-ups. But in Kenya, sometimes the most violent protests, or the protests with the most severe consequences, like loss of life, damage to property, all of that, those protests have sometimes been spearheaded by children. And the setting for these? Boarding school.
Boarding school, which is where today's story takes place. Today's episode looks at one particular protest that one of our former interns, Esther, took part in. Esther was with us from July to December 2024. She did a wonderful job helping us digitize huge amounts of library archives. And something about Esther is that she'd always been a good kid, a good student, trying to do the right thing, which is what she was doing back in 2016 when she was in high school with her friend Wagari. In this story, we see what happens when doing the right thing goes against school policy. Here's Esther. She'll tell us more.
Back in 2016, when I was in secondary school, me and Wangari, a good friend of mine, ended up at odds with our school administration. We found ourselves protesting what we felt were understandable grievances. Injustices, really, but things didn't quite go as we had hoped. I sat down with Wangari to talk about what happened to us back then. Wangari and I met in Form 3 through our drama club.
We just sort of found that we have so many things in common. We'd end up in the debate club, journalism, and we also both really loved to yap. So
we went to a boarding school together that was pretty strict. Most boarding schools in this country are really strict, actually. But I think we were both excited to be going to high school.
I had this idea of what high school would be, but most of it was fed by like Western media. Because, I'd watch Nickelodeon growing up and I'd see how their high schools were. And for me, high school, I expected it was going to be fun.
Yeah, it wasn't Nickelodeon at all. It was a school up country, really prestigious. As in, you had to get good grades to get in. And it had just become a national school. National schools are the highest levels of schools in Kenya. They take kids from all over the country, and their teachers are also meant to be the best of the best. So our school was under pressure to fit this new status, and because of that, it was big on rules. But me and Wangari still had a good time and did lots of clubs together. When we were in Form 4, what was meant to be our last year of secondary school, one weekend, that was when it all began.
So I remember that day we had put a play together, and we wanted to showcase it over lunchtime. So that's what we were doing. And then there were students who had gone out for different things. I think it was sports and science club. And then as we are finishing up on the play, we hear the bus coming back. Our school didn't allow people to come with snacks. They will do searches once you come from events, which we were not opposed to. We were teenagers. A lot of us wanted these sugar things and we wanted to be able to find ways to bring them in. The school knew this. The first, I think, inciting incident was the fact that at that time, I think it was only the deputy who was around, and she was the only female teacher. Then there was another male teacher. So they allowed the male teacher to do the frisking. And it wasn't a male teacher who had the best reputation. Yeah. So people were really pissed. They were like, we'd rather wait for the female deputy. It's Saturday. We don't have anywhere to go. You can frisk us. But why are you allowing the male teacher to frisk us? And the way that he was doing it was very groppish.
This was a teacher, by the way, that already had a not great reputation at our school, our all-girls school.
And so people started surrounding the bus and being like, no, it's better we just wait. We don't want him to conduct the search. They didn't listen.
That male teacher did the search anyway. And then about 30 girls were found with contraband. They were made to kneel in the cold outside the staff room for hours as night fell. We got seriously worked up.
We were trying to get the student leaders to intervene, but these student leaders seemed to be on the side of the administration instead of being on the side of the people.
People were angry with some of those student leaders because it's like they were moles for the administration. You have to understand that we already didn't trust the student leaders at our school. A few months before all this happened, we had a student election, and instead of running on the ballot and being voted in the normal way, some of them had just been anointed leaders by the teachers themselves.
So we knew these student leaders are not gonna champion for our rights. So I remember after that, we went back to class and we were just talking. And then I was like, guys, we can actually do something about this. And so I remember taking a chalk and starting to write out a plan on the board. If the administration cannot listen to us being diplomatic, then we might have to rally and have ourselves listened to in different ways. Then it turns out I was not the only one having this conversation. Every class where people were, there was someone having that same conversation with people in those different classes. So now it started to take wind. Oh yeah, we're gonna strike. So the idea got planted through different people. So I remember going to sleep and I was like, yeah, I need to sleep with something I can run in. So it gets to around 1 or 2 a.m. I don't know who was in charge of it, but somehow the lights went off the entire school. And then the way that people were being woken up was using fire extinguishers. So there's some people who are going around and they're just like, wake up, it's time. So they'd if people are not hearing, they'd slam the door of the dorm and spray the fire extinguisher just to get people up.
We gathered and made our way to the principal's house.
The principal comes out and so she's like, girls, what's wrong? Calm down. And we tell her, no, we didn't like the way that the deputy allowed Mr. So-and-so to be able to frisk us. We've also been bringing so many grievances to you guys. You've not been hearing them. We don't like the way the process is undemocratic for electing our leaders. We also didn't like our diet choices, like a lot of things.
The principal seemed understanding and suggested we go to bed, meet the next day and give the administration our grievances, which is exactly what we did. We met as a huge group, wrote down all our issues and handed them to the principal with a request for them to address our concerns by the following week.
So Sunday ends and then Monday comes in. There was no learning that day.
The school basically didn't know what to do with us. Teachers seemed mad that we had somehow gone against them. So the school decided to just send us home 2 weeks early. The whole school. There's a reason our school was probably nervous.
Kenya is experiencing its worst asthma outbreak following a spate of attacks in more than 100 government secondary schools.
Local officials said the fire broke out at 11 p.m. in a dormitory.
Rioting students of Otieno Boys High School yesterday set fire to several dormitories and shattered the windows.
Between 2015 and 2016, 350 Kenyan schools burnt. Our school probably thought these protests will lead to fires, so they just sent us all home. When we were at school protesting, we felt powerful, like we could actually change things.
I do recognize maybe using the fire extinguishers may have been a bit dramatic, but I think we thought it was necessary to just kind of like have our voices heard. When Martin Luther and the people who are fighting for the freedom of the Black people, when they had gotten to a point where conversation was no longer working, they decided that, oh yeah, now we have to use other means. And, such people were the backbone of our inspiration. Or even just looking at our own history, when people such as the Mau Mau or, the resistors, Wangari Maathai, when they had gotten to a point where conversation with the people in power could not work, they tied themselves to trees. They decided that, okay, you're going to hear us one way or another. So I think that is the thought process that we had.
But sitting alone in our homes, it hit us. This protest was probably going to cost us. Maybe this one protest will impact our lives forever.
Home, I'm just this 16-year-old who's now contemplating, and it began to sink the enormity of what we had done. I was not apologetic about what we had done or what I had said, and I stood by it. I think the enormity was, I might get punished for it, and the punishment could most possibly determine the rest of my life, because I could fail to go to university, especially since, our system sees the way of success one way. That is, you have to go to university for you to be able to be successful. So I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to fail in life.
After 2 weeks, they began to call people back in shifts, returning on different days. When we got back to school, they gave us a questionnaire.
On the night of this and this, where were you? Who did this? Who told you this? Did you see anyone using the fire extinguishers and such?
When Wangari is eventually called back to school, it's a different story for her. She doesn't get a questionnaire. As she's going to fetch her stuff, she gets a heads up.
As I'm going to the dorm, everyone's like, hey, we need to tell you this. But when we were writing names, if we didn't have a name, they'd tell us to write your name. So they're like, I don't know what they have planned for you, but just know you guys are cooked.
What happened next was ridiculous. Our parents had just dropped us back to school. Then the very next day, the school handed about 30 of us letters sending us back home. But here's the thing. This school is up country. Some kids have traveled from Mombasa to get there, and we were told to vacate the premises immediately. No mobile phone reception, 4 kilometers to the road to find public transport, and we're just teenage girls stranded without our parents. Where was the duty of care? Somehow, we got everyone back home without the school's help. After another 2 weeks at home, they sent messages to our parents telling them to come with us for a disciplinary meeting. We went back to school, had the meeting, and again, we were sent back home.
I think we stayed for almost a week again with no communication. We don't know what's happening. So after that, now they start to communicate to us. So I remember I was told to come back with everything. So me, I thought everyone is coming back, but I was the only one who went back. Yeah, no one else went back.
Yup. Of the 30 of us who got sent home, only Wangari returned to school. Everyone else was expelled, myself included. I was very shocked. I felt angry, but I also felt relieved. I didn't want to go back to a school that will treat me the way it had. But I was alright in the end. I never went back to any high school, but I did my final exams. Surprised myself and the teachers by how well I did, and I got into a good university. When I look back on it all, I don't think the school cared about our voices. They saw us as kids, as troublemakers, potential arsonists, reputation wreckers, because we had something we wanted to say, and we just wanted to be heard. All the school cared about was getting good grades and prestige, and they didn't care if we got traumatized in the process. And it didn't help that it was a boarding school.
I've been in boarding school since class 4. So essentially, since I was 8 years old. Having gone through this system, I will say that it doesn't have as much benefit as most of the population may perceive it to, because these kids are in the fundamental points of their lives, like their mentalities are being morphed, and these teachers are imprinting ideologies that may be permanent for like the rest of their lives. And I think in such an age, it's important for them to be with people who would have their best ideals for them.
My goodness. What Esther and Wangari went through.
Right? I went to boarding school and I hated it at the time, but looking back now, it wasn't that bad. Nothing I went through was like Esther and Wangari's experience. But I was really inspired by their story, and it really got me thinking about boarding schools in general. I discovered this provocative article in The Elephant titled, "Abolish This Relic Called the Boarding School." So we found the author, Professor Reginald Odor, and another one of our amazing interns, Clinton, sat down with him. So Clinton, what did you discover in talking to the professor?
According to the professor, you can't compare schools and they are different. For instance, there's a lot of peer pressure from fellow students in school. But the biggest thing is that kids need their parents, and boarding schools cannot replace that.
The trouble is we think of school as mainly about head knowledge, but school is about education. It's not about just mere knowledge transfer. And education comes from a Latin word, educatio, meaning to raise children, to bring up children, not just to feed their heads with head knowledge.
To him, boarding schools are not like these sacred places that do no harm. And we can really see this when we look at the history of how boarding schools came to be in Kenya.
They started very early in 1902, and the main thing about the boarding schools was that they were intended to take away children from their homes so as to mold their minds to accept the colonial order. They were even forbidden to speak their languages, their indigenous languages. Then they were taught that Western culture was the superior culture. And the idea was, once you mold the minds of colonized young ones, then they will be easier to keep under colonialism. That is the main idea behind boarding school.
Over 100 years later, we see very clearly from what happened to Esther and Wangari how boarding schools in Kenya still demand that intense no questioning of authority.
And the thing about Esther and Wangari's protests is that it was happening at a time of this growing phenomenon of students burning down their schools in Kenya. And this is only happening in boarding schools, not in day schools. And it hasn't really stopped. Just recently, in September 2024, 21 school kids died in a boarding school fire.
Actually, this is something Professor Odor and I spoke about as well. It seems like fires only happen in boarding schools and not day schools.
I think it's extremely instructive because we have students in day school and we have students in boarding school. So why is it that the ones in day schools are not burning down their facilities and the ones in boarding schools are? The reasons are many. One of the reasons is just frustration with the quality of food and accommodation in boarding schools. Even if you had a bad meal in a day school, you had a bad lunch, you know you are going home to a supper. Not every child does, but some do. And that alone diffuses the pressure. But you are in boarding school, the toilets are dirty, the dormitories are crowded, the food is bad. That is pressure building up. One of the reasons we need day schools is to relieve boarding schools of responsibilities to provide catering, accommodation, and night security. Those are not the functions of a school. The mandate of a school is to teach. So why make a school into a low-quality hotel?
The professor knows that there are a lot of reasons people keep their children in boarding schools. For instance, there are some families that lack food, shelter, and childcare. In fact, Professor Odur went to a boarding school himself, and it changed his life. You see, Professor Odur is visually impaired, and when he was only 4 years old, his parents sent him to take a school for the blind, which is a boarding school. It was a sacrifice his parents had to make to give him the life he has now. However, his time at that school was really tough.
I am not saying that boarding schools, there is nothing good about them. They have helped many people. I am just a philosopher, and philosophers distinguish what there is from what there ought to be. We call that reality and ideal. Where most people are locked is in the reality. And they think because there is a reality, then it is the ideal. They think because this is what we have, then it is what we ought to have in perpetuity. If we do that, then we cannot dream for better. We must use the reality we have, but we must also plan to improve it. Otherwise, we are just handing over to the next generation something we haven't worked on.
As always, thank you for listening. This is A Palace for the People, and I am Wanjiro Koinange.
I am Angela Washuka.
If you would like to find out more about Bookbank, visit our website at bookbank.org. This episode was produced by Ida Holly Nambi, Mae Francis, Esther M., and Clinton Otieno. As always, many thanks to all our guests and experts for sharing their knowledge. A very special thanks to Maureen Mumbua, who leads our archive department. To donate or support our work, please visit bookbank.org. And you can find learning resources to go along with this episode at bookbank.org/podcast. This podcast was supported by the British Council's Cultural Protection Fund, administered in partnership with the UK's Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport.